And okay, so we're recording. I don't know, should we go around the group and everyone can give like a quick intro, maybe like your background and just why are you interested in the question of decentralizing AI? So I guess I'll go first. I'm Richard. My background is in AI research. And I worked for a big tech company where I kind of became disillusioned about centralized AI, and was surprised when I found that no one was asking the question about how decentralization can help. And so that our thesis is that it can help and that Web3 can help us. And that's what we're trying to explore with people at the moment.
I'll go next as well. So my name is Hitesh. I originally worked in a health science background, a physiotherapy background, but was always sort of interested in building things. So started learning programming and then decided to do a master's in computer science. And I'm currently finishing off my master's and got really passionate about cryptography and cybersecurity, and naturally got drawn into blockchain as an application for cryptography. And then myself and Richard started tinkering with this idea of building sort of a computer vision application for athletes. And we soon realized the whole sort of infrastructure around building AI products in this space was still in its early days. So we really decided to start tackling that problem. And actually we asked the same question of, how could we decentralize AI? And that started becoming a very interesting and exciting question for me and Richard to sort of pull the thread at. So yeah, that's just a brief introduction of me. Maybe I'll pass it on to Jacob to give an introduction.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Jakob. I'm currently in my undergrad studying maths and physics, but I have learned AI, a bit of AI in my spare time, and I've been learning for 2 years now. And I've also worked as a machine learning intern at a startup that's solving automatic invoice extraction with computer vision. And I'm really interested in how Web3 can sort of improve the AI stack, and how maybe it can help with efficiency of research as well. Because I feel like from last session, what was kind of established was that the centralization of AI not only leads to big companies doing sometimes kind of working on problems that might not lead to the best applications, as with the whole body tracking with security cameras, but also the fact that data is not really shared across these big companies, or that data ownership isn't retained by the people who actually got that data. I think that Web3 can solve that issue, and we see that with, for instance, the Ocean Protocol. And if that was also applied to AI, and there was a whole new layer of AI research that was on Web3, I think that might also lead to better efficiency in actually AI research and overall AI development. I guess I'll pass it on to Greg.
Sure. Hi, my name is Greg. So I'm the founder of Window Finance, and our goal is to accelerate adoption of DeFi by demystifying the space for kind of new entrants, primarily larger entrants, institutions and families, this type of thing. And the way we intend to do this is through information. So you could see how AI could play into that very nicely. I'm kind of falling down two rabbit holes at the same time. So one in Web3 in general, so I'm maybe halfway down that rabbit hole, and I've just started to fall down the rabbit hole of data science, and I'm just intrigued by the whole field. I'm a noob very much, but I think it just has so much potential. So we have a data scientist on the team, and the kind of the reason why I'm so excited about your initiative is that, so I built the past 15 years, I've been building startups. I just sold my third one. And we were so reliant on a platform, specifically Facebook, not with AI, but as a platform, that when they kind of did the thing that they do as a centralized platform, they broke everything that we built, and we lost clients, we lost revenue, we lost employees, and it almost cost the destruction of our company. And so I could see the risks in being so reliant on centralized anything. That's most of it. And the other part is I'm a massively parallel computer engineer, but that was my training years and years ago. And I find it so intriguing, kind of how you can handle algorithms when they are decentralized, whether with people or otherwise. So maybe I'll pass it to someone that's invisible. I think Steph was here as well.
Hi, yes, invisible. My name is Steph. Nice to meet you all. I think I had a little bit of a chat with a couple of you before, but my background is primarily neuroscience based. So I'm based in Australia. I started off at the University of Queensland and did my extended undergrad and then a research degree there, and then moved over to the University of Cambridge to do my master's in clinical and computational neuroscience. And that's where I kind of really got into working with machine learning in particular. So kind of when I was there, it kind of opened a big wide world of possibilities in terms of brain-computer interfaces as well. So that's, primarily my focus when we speak on AI, but obviously speaking in terms of ideological and ethical things as well. That's something that I'm quite interested in. I'll pass along to Romeo.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Romeo Sigihor. I'm actually passionate about three things recently, and that is IoT, AI, and blockchain. I'm doing my master's in Harvard in information management system. And once upon a time, I built an IoT device to help the blind, and actually has an AI computer vision system that build upon that solution. So I built a company called OptiSapiens, and it's focused on computer vision.
And David was waiting in the wrong room. I was just chatting to him on Slack. I don't know, would you be able to give a quick intro and let us know, like, just your background, a bit about your background, and why you're interested in decentralizing AI, or the question?
Oh, sure, thanks. So I am David Lockie. I live in the UK, in Brighton, which is like London by sea, down on the south coast. Lots of tech people here. I've been working in digital for about 20 years, and about 15 of that's been in WordPress. So I'm really interested in decentralizing AI, because I think that it's inevitable that AI will disrupt open source software projects. And I'm really interested to see how Web3 communities can give open source, like Web2 open source communities, a way to collect, manage, and sort of leverage big data sets and the AI technologies that sit on top of them, so that open source projects don't get increasingly pulled apart by centralized players. That's where I'm coming from.
Very interesting, yeah. Everyone's got like really different kind of things that they're working on, and coming at AI from a different perspective. So yeah, like it's really like one of the things we want to try and figure out how to do is, how can we be a decentralized AI community working on all these different projects, but somehow like align. And I think that's going to be like quite an interesting problem that needs to be solved. You know, like decentralized AI is great, but how do you actually coordinate people and get people into the same rooms, like to come up with interesting ideas and applications of data and things like this? I don't know if anyone has thought about that question at all or has any comments on it.
I have maybe just a quick thought. I'm speaking to other people, not in the context of AI specifically, but in kind of data capture and standardization. And the way I see it, there is we have standards in the sense that most people are building on EVMs, and there's a certain way to read from smart contracts in blocks. So I think that's a commonality, regardless of what project we're working on. So and I think, as you mentioned when we first chat, Richard, kind of this wrangling the data and cleaning it up is half the battle. So yeah, that's just a thought.
Really interesting.
I think I'd probably come at it from a sort of logical perspective. So there are different components of like an AI, data and AI workflow. So you've got to have like the data collection, you've got to have the data storage, you've got to have the data warehousing and management, you've got to have the model creation, you've got to have the model training, you've got to have the commercial applications that sit around that, and then you've got to have like the ongoing surrounding compliance part, which I think is really interesting. It makes me think a little bit of like what Ocean Protocol, I think Ocean is doing, so kind of housing these big data sets and essentially letting people send their models to kind of query and get trained by them without actually accessing the underlying data. And I think that's sort of getting that model right, almost like a zero knowledge data set, so that people can allow their data to be collected with the assurance that it's never going to be accessed in a way that is like privacy breaking. So I think there would like those, and probably more or better defined components of bringing this into the world, and they're all quite different in their needs and how they get done.
Yeah, what's interesting about Ocean at the moment was obviously they're creating this data marketplace. And like the first thing you want to do when you're creating a data marketplace is to get data into the marketplace, so you have like choice. And they're kind of at that stage now where there's quite a lot of data. But the interesting thing is that like none of the data is being consumed. So like you were mentioning, there's so many steps to work with the data. You need to process it, you need to have the application. And so like it's kind of played out practically that you can't just have data providers putting up any sort of data and then just leaving it, up to data scientists or like business developers to do that after. You kind of need to work with the data the whole process. And like even when you're putting the data on the marketplace, you need to have a business application in mind and some data scientists to process it and turn it into something valuable. And so that was kind of what we identified was missing in Ocean at the moment, was this layer on top of data scientists, business developers, domain experts, lots of different stakeholders, and we feel like that's the next step. So we've got the data marketplace side, the source of the data providers, all that sort of stuff, but what we're missing is like the rest of the tech company. So one reason that tech companies are so powerful is because they have all of this data, right? So now we're starting to get to the point where we can do that in a decentralized fashion using these data marketplaces. But of course, this tech company has all of these other functions. They have like meeting rooms, and they have like events and design sessions and all of these sorts of things that get different types of people into rooms together and coming up with like cool products that use data. And yeah, I guess our question is like, how do we recreate that in a decentralized way? All of those kind of things that the tech company offers. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts.
If I may, I suppose I had two thoughts. The first was probably to David's topic. So obviously, like when I'm thinking about, for example, a BCI on a blockchain, that's a medical data, use of medical data, which then has to be consented. So that's something that I've considered quite a bit in terms of, the ongoing consenting to research and use of that collective data. And so that's something that I think is very, very important, not even just with medical data, but with anything you're providing. But the second point, I suppose, to Richard was, I think that it's almost maybe a benefit to the decentralized community when we're talking about these things, because as much as you can get people in a room to discuss these things, and yeah, you might vibe off each other and create that atmosphere, you're going to have a wider range of people to select from, like if you're a decentralized group. So, if we were to create a Twitter presence or a Discord presence, I have no worry at all that there would be amazing conversations to be had.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is not specific to AI, but if I could try to reframe your point, Richard, it sounds like there's low engagement with this movement of decentralized AI, and as expressed by low access of data in the marketplace. So if our problem truly is engagement, one solution, as you say, could be to hold events like Google and all these guys do, but there are other solutions, and just coming from an application builder perspective, Ocean wasn't even on my radar. So could it be that the root cause of this low engagement could be something with awareness or communication? So I would try to kind of identify the root cause and then maybe think of solutions.
I agree with Greg in saying that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of awareness, because there isn't much use if people don't know about the utility that something like Ocean might provide. So number one is awareness. Number two is the friction. So once you're aware of something, it needs to be super simple for somebody to be onboarded into that technology. So in the case of what we're doing, if you want to build AI products, it should be really easy to do so. And that means, the different skills and the different people that are required to build an AI product needs to come together and carry out all the tasks that are needed for an AI product to be functional in the market. So there are all these different tasks that need to be coordinated in being able to provide a product or a service, and that's another part of the puzzle, is being able to onboard people really quickly and easily, and like the first problem you mentioned, the awareness. So I think those are two of the big high level issues in trying to get people onboarded into this movement.
Yeah, the awareness is for sure a big one. Just because I've tried explaining to a few data scientists, and it's almost like a hostile reception. It's been considering how many different people from different backgrounds are coming into Web3 now, from artists to legal people and all sorts of people. For some reason, there seems to be quite few data scientists. And in my experience of talking to data scientists, it's been quite a suspicious response, I would say. And maybe that's the case when you explain Web3 to anyone who hasn't come across it before. But and I can't figure out why it is, because data scientists are technical people who a lot of them have just learned like a new skill recently because data science itself is so new. And so I can't figure out why data scientists wouldn't be among the first to come into Web3. And there's a real hurdle in onboarding them and a real suspicion. And I don't know if that's just because like they feel like they're working on something cutting edge, like so they don't need to get into any other cutting edge industry, or that like they're well rewarded in their jobs. Like AI jobs usually fun and rewarding and stuff like that, and they're looked after by these centralized tech companies to a large extent by being fed. So maybe they don't see them as big and powerful and evil as I see them. Yeah, I don't know what people's thoughts are on that.
Have you ever tried, Richard, a mom test interview? I don't know if you've heard of the book, The Mom Test. If you haven't,
I've heard of it,
go
but
grab.
I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't even know if the book is 100 pages. It's a very quick read and very well organized. It's essentially a way to interview stakeholders in a way that's non-biased. So it's kind of like, let's say that you have an idea of decentralizing AI. You wouldn't interview a person saying, what do you think about decentralizing AI? You would kind of ask them about their life and their work and their journey. And anyway, that's the general principle. But as we're building our product, it's just been invaluable to have these stakeholder interviews completely non-biased to understand what their true pain points are. So, even if we arrive at the same solution and the same method that we thought, we understand why it will work through these types of interviews. And, in your case, I don't envy, or let's say our case, because I'm also very, very interested in having a good solution. You have very different stakeholders. I mean, the data scientists have a very their own interests, but for example, if I take myself as an application, a builder that would use some sort of output from this, it's my needs are very different. So I think it's worthwhile if you want to think of it like supply and demand. Like I might be the demand, but the supply are the data scientists and data providers. Healthy interviews are, I think, are the way to go.
That sounds really interesting.
And another thesis of why it might be hard is because there aren't sort of examples of it being done really well that people can look up to. There is a sort of a clear path for data scientists in reaching the top of the ladder, but in a decentralized AI sort of ecosystem, there isn't that clear road ahead for them. Again, it's like Greg mentioned, lack of awareness. There isn't a really good example for people to hang on to and say, okay, if I do all these things, I would be able to be like this person. Or, that's another possibility of why it could be hard fought.
So thinking that.
Sorry.
Oh. No, sorry, go ahead.
Up to you.
Okay, so I was just thinking whether that I'm not sure how exactly the end product from a decentralized AI system is defined. So if we say that we're using Web3 to sort of decentralize the development of AI, then do the AI models still stay within the Web3 ecosystem, or can they be bought by private entities and then used by them in whatever way they want? And I feel that might also pose some issues, especially with sensitive data like from BCIs, as Steph mentioned, because even though we can have a pipeline where the data is completely private and it's a kind of zero knowledge training where we actually don't see the data, since the AI model will be trained on that data and we're going to see how successful that AI model is, I think we could find the distribution of data from the data set, because no data set really encapsulates the whole space of available data. And if we find a subset of the data in the real world that model isn't really trained on, we might then determine what that data that we trained on was in the first place. And when it's sensitive data, where there's a lot of incentive to try to find what that data is for someone who wants to use that for malicious purposes, then I think that's a real issue, because once everyone sees what the AI model, how the AI model is successful, we can also know we can also trace back and see what might or may not, what is or isn't included in the original data set, and what the quality of that data is. So that, and I feel like that kind of defeats the purpose of decentralizing the data sets in the first place and making them private in the first place.
I think that's a really good point, Jakob, which is that like AI isn't the product, AI is a technology in support of the product, and it's sort of further down the, like, I guess what I was going to ask is, like, what are the differences? What are all the ways that it's different, decentralizing AI and big data sets compared to doing the same thing with like a DeFi protocol, for example, because, you know, that's a sort of fairly well-worn path. And I think you've hit on a really key one there, in terms of, like, if you're a protocol developer and there's a bounty to do something, usually it's like, you know, it's a well-defined problem, and the challenge is to like create the correct code to make it so. With a big data set, you don't know whether the answer is there or necessarily even if the data is there. And so it's hard to put a bounty kind of approach together. I think that, you know, the other one that we've touched on there, I don't know if we're making notes or just sort of having a chat about this stuff, but the other one that we touched on is like talent availability. You know, if you're a good entrepreneurial data scientist, like, you know, you're printing money anyway, because they're, you know, they're very rare and very well paid. Whereas I guess, you know, I guess for sort of a protocol developer, you know, maybe the barrier to entry is a little bit lower to start on that journey. I don't know.
David, I wanted to kind of dig deeper. You know, you mentioned that bounties wouldn't work, and I'm curious why you think bounties wouldn't work for this type of challenge.
Well, I definitely think they need to work. I mean, that's the only way that you do this. I think it's like you have sort of a core funded team, and then they basically manage a bounty program to bring on board a wider development community. What I meant to say was that it's harder probably to both create a bounty or at least for potential bounty hunters to evaluate their chances of success. You know, if it's a job to like write a smart contract, it's something you've done before, then your risk of taking the bounty on is quite low. If you've got to use miscellaneous AI techniques against an unknown data source to try and answer a certain question, I guess that the risk factor is a bit higher. So maybe it's just a different type of bounty. Like maybe there are more steps towards that kind of providing the solution, which is, you know, what are the questions that we could look at answering? Maybe there needs to be sort of more gradual approach before there's just this sort of suddenly solve this problem using AI and all this data.
Yeah, I agree that bounties are important. Do you think that ownership is also important? Like, if data scientists or data science teams didn't have bounties to work for, would they work purely for ownership of their creations? Or like, do people need to, I know everyone needs to, you know, pay their bills and stuff. Maybe it depends based on where they are in their career and stuff like that. But like, which is more attractive, the ownership aspect, or, you know, still getting paid a decent salary like you would in a tech company?
surely it could be combined somehow, like, so in terms of equity. But like, definitely, if you're looking at a lot of the people in this space, I think a lot of people are really driven by the fact that they think they're doing the new thing, the best thing. And, I mean, I feel like it's intellectual ego to some point, and that drives a lot of people in the space, but definitely equity. And even if you're not able to provide bounties, that may cut out some people, but it definitely would still leave a fair amount, I would say. But I could be wrong. Also, Jacob, on the point of the zero learning data, this is something that I'm not 100% sure of the technicals of it all, but I was considering the option of having, for example, so I mean, basic principles of like very minor, like minimization of data contribution to the pool. So, for example, if you don't have to provide a little extra data, then you don't. And yeah, that might eventually be donated to the pool, but in a different way, and in a different kind of transaction. And then once all of those transactions are sent to X on like within whatever dApp or however you're doing this, then at that point you could have almost like a tornado cache type mechanism, which then spits out within a different kind of visible data set with integers and everything that can be labeled and understood. And then from there you create your AI. But again, you'd still have transactions going from the original donator to the pool and things like that. So I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the monetization side is probably actually the most straightforward part to solve for, because you can just run it on some sort of monetization per run of the contract, where you could just have that baked in as royalties or whatever. I wonder whether one of the other aspects of AI being different is actually humans' ability to describe what it is that they're looking for, like the sort of sheer comprehensibility of an AI model. I'm reading a book called Autonomous at the moment, which is kind of about autonomous weapons, but it's also a lot about AI in general. And it's kind of interesting just to think about, like, we are essentially creating things that we can't fully understand ourselves now. Like, that's sort of the challenge with AI, is that it can behave unexpectedly in ways that are very surprising. And you see that with like how easy it is to fool visual cognition models, or like some of the moves that like DeepMind pulled off in the Go, like just stuff that humans would never even do. It would not be on our radar to like test that as an edge case. So you can write a very clear list of acceptance criteria for smart contracts. That's like a fairly well-worn path now, although of course there are still vulnerabilities. It's a deterministic sort of a venture, whether as an AI model is like, it's probabilistic, and it's therefore much harder to sort of define what the outcome, what all the acceptance criteria might be for this to be successful. So I think you'd almost have to leave it down to like market forces of like, do people find this tool valuable in X or Y ways in achieving this or that goal of increased quality or increased efficiency. And that in turn puts up quite a high barrier to entry, because you'd basically have to say like, we'll fund some applications to build some cool stuff on top of this data set, and then hope that that sort of seeds success. And there are examples of that. I'm working with grant for the web, which is trying to do the same thing with web monetization. They have like $100 million fund, and they're like, if you've got a cool idea, we'll fund it, and hopefully that's sort of seed funding for the ecosystem. But that is a little bit different from like the core funding for like a protocol, where there's a much clearer set of requirements. It's more about like how do you build a big team around you quickly to get stuff built out. So I wonder whether it means that you need a sort of a fatter core team than is traditional, and to rely less on bounties and instead just on recruiting like permanent full-time data scientists until at least you've got the thing up and rolling, and there are sort of, it's battle tested enough that you can then more clearly define these sort of smaller bounties. I don't know.
One thing about bounties I just want to quickly mention is I just put into the chat as well a really good paper about data collaboration. So I suppose in how data science differs from sort of software engineering is it's data science is more of an exploratory sort of endeavor. So in terms of defining what are the goals to be verified for your bounty to be released might not be as clear as something like in software engineering, or like you were saying, protocol engineering. So the whole concept of bounties based on task completed might need to change, because the essential question is, how do you verify that someone has explored the data enough to provide value back? So that question, I'm not sure if people have ideas on how one might be able to verify something like that. But I guess that would be a good way to start off a bounty program, is how do you verify exploration in data science models? And then once you're able to verify that somebody has done work, then you can peg the bounty back to that system of verifying work, rather than saying, if you create an algorithm, you get X amount of money. You say, if you put in this much amount of work based on some system that can verify the work, then you are eligible for that bounty.
Yeah, that's interesting. Go ahead, Greg. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm the the new guy in the classroom, because I think everyone here is way deeper than I am on data science. But as I was looking at my own particular application, the first benchmark that came up was Numerai. Are you aware of this initiative? And I think it almost seems a bit evil what they're doing, because on one hand they do have some sort of Web3 mechanism for bounties and rewarding data scientists, but on the other hand, it's like almost like they're constructing this Death Star algorithm that rolls up other people's algorithms. So I just mentioned this because even if they are evil or have aspects that are not so aligned with our values, they seem to be solving some of these problems and successful in their own way of getting people engaged. They kind of figured out in their own way of how to anonymize the data, share it with people. Anyway, I just wanted to throw it out there because it seems like it could be an interesting benchmark, and maybe there's some aspects that we could learn from.
May I ask why you say it's evil?
Yeah, so yeah, good question. My feeling is that they're kind of like this almost gatekeeper of like the data. This aggregate data set is ours like Numerai's data set. We're going to allow you to borrow it in order for you to kind of help us improve our own algorithm. And so you're going to be compensated for that in a certain way. And I guess you could say that even the IP of the actual approach stays with the data scientist, but the results kind of flow up to the economic results flow up to Numerai, and not necessarily to all the people helping out.
Well,
but it could
they
be
do flow back, by the way. So obviously there are people that trade on the Numerai coin, but also they have their competition. So if you're predicting in a good way, then you're going to be rewarded for that.
Cool. Well, even better. So is there? So maybe I'll reframe my question. How can we improve, or how can we improve on Numerai in maybe a general sense? Because I think Numerai is very specific on stock trading and creating a hedge fund. How could we learn from them to create a generalized AI?
I think that since Numerai has only one goal, and that is to build the ultimate AI model for stock trading, I think that's why they can just use this competition, these kind of like bounties, where I've heard a podcast with the founder, and he specifically said in that conversation that they're not looking for people who will work on their models full time, but rather who are doing their full-time job, and maybe over the weekend they will just spend a couple of hours trying to make this model, then they publish to the competition, and then they may get some rewards. Although I think right now the rewards are actually less than it costs to train the models so that they're good enough to win the competition. But I think that in a general ecosystem where it's not just one single AI problem, I don't think it can work in a way that you have a couple of people who are just working over the weekend. I think you need to have a team of people who are actually working full time. And then I think the question becomes how do we have a decentralized organization that has people working full time? And in that case, I don't think a bounty system could really work, because when you have a lot of people that are trading the coin, the Numerai coin, then that also attracts attention of a lot of people who are going to try to get into the competition, and Numerai can use the models even from people who will not actually win the competition. But when it's a general problem, when you have multiple AI projects, I don't think something like that can really work, and there needs to be a way to onboard people full time, I think.
Totally agree with Jakub. I think he's like hit the nail on the head there, saying, it's a very narrow goal. However, AI can solve many problems. And in order to build products that are useful and are viable in the market, you need people working full time, maintaining and providing a service to customers. And in order to do that, you need a model where people can work with stability, knowing that they're going to have an income coming in the next month or for the next year. So I'm sort of conflicted in the whole bounty-based system, where bounties are a very temporary thing. You can't promise, or you can't build a family around, say, a bounty system. People naturally like stability and like the assurance of their financial stability. So if we really want people to start building products in a way that's that's aligned with how the market is right now and how people live right now, we need to start thinking about ways where income can flow in a stable way, and bounty might not be the best option for that.
just on the idea of like various people contributing to some like performance of an AI, whether it's like markets. The link I just posted in the chat is it's for like it's NFTs that you can converse with basically, and so people like they can bring their own NFT or they can buy an NFT and they can add this like AI on top of it, which is also an NFT, which gives it like a certain level of intelligence. And so are you off, Greg? Oh, okay.
No.
And so, yeah, like if you watch that video, what's really interesting is that you can like choose an option to converse with the NFT, and so you're basically training this conversational AI, and then I think you get like some sort of rewards and tokens or something for that. And what's really interesting is that a non-technical person can like help to train the AI algorithm. And like we've talked about like no code training before, which is like, you know, basically someone being able to train an AI algorithm without any sort of technical background. And I think like Web3 might enable that a bit more if we come up with the right interfaces and stuff. And so, for example, like that could be, for example, just like choosing the data through a UI that an AI algorithm is trained on. Like that's a really important step that a data scientist does, for example. But yeah, it would be really interesting if like could we have these like types of AI? So like one of the things that I'd love to work on is like anonymization, and so you could have this like this anonymization AI in your wallet, like an AI wallet that it had multiple functions, but maybe it could, you know, if you're on Zoom and you didn't want people to see your face, maybe it could like, you know, face swap to some other avatar or something like that. Or maybe it could change the style of your writing so that it wasn't, or maybe it could change like the sound of your voice. And maybe somehow like you would use this AI, but you would also like help to train it in some way that was without code, I suppose. Just some really interesting ideas starting to come out from other projects.
I think we probably should wrap, Richard. I think it's nearing an hour now, and people probably have to jump on other calls. But I think it was, again, great conversation, and I think people would be interested in maybe continuing the conversation. If
yeah, really interesting. Definitely up for another one.
Perfect. Sweet. Yeah, we're going to continue like this, like same day next week. We might ask people if they want to do a design session about like which direction they'd like to go with the community, or maybe we could just continue a chat like this. I think there's still more room to run.
I think so too.
But also we want to do some like live data science hacking sessions and things like this. So yeah, we basically just want to start to host more sessions like this, get people involved, and like and listen to how they'd like to drive the project, like what direction they'd be interested in going. So we'll keep in touch.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks everyone for joining, and see you again next week, I suppose.